In today's video, we're back with some updated NHL trade rumors and some free agent signing rumors. We have a lot to cover today, including the latest speculation on Penguins forward Phil Kessel, Vegas Golden Knights defenseman Colin Miller, and the free agent rumors include Artemi Panarin, Jason Spezza, and Erik Karlsson. We'll get into all that coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, we have a lot to cover today. All kinds of speculation on some pretty big names in the NHL regarding some trades and some potential free agent signings. I certainly recommend that today's video is one you're going to want to watch all the way through. Lots of great important information here in today's video. Now let's get started here with the Pittsburgh Penguins and Phil Kessel. Now there's been a lot of talk around the Penguins since they lost in 4 straight games to the New York Islanders. There's lots of rumors around Evgeny Malkin. Phil Kessel's another name that's been mentioned quite a bit here. TSN recently just put out their spring trade bait board, and Phil Kessel is at number 1. So their insiders believe that there's a really strong possibility that Kessel would be the one to be traded. Now, of course, keep in mind he does have an 8-team trade list, so there is limitations on where he can go. However, there is a number of teams reportedly interested, and of course, Phil Kessel might be willing to waive under some circumstances. The main 2 teams that appear to be showing interest are the LA Kings and the Arizona Coyotes. Now, the Coyotes are a team where he has a connection with former assistant coach in Pittsburgh, Rick Tocchet. They called him the Kessel Whisperer. It's been reported throughout the past year that Coach Mike Sullivan had a lot of different stuff going on in the locker room, things going on behind the scenes that most people didn't know about. I know GM Jim Rutherford said this was probably the best year that Sullivan's been as a coach, even though the record and the playoff result might not have indicated it. He said there was a lot of other things going on off the ice that he had to manage and did a pretty good job with. So obviously there does appear to be some tension between Kessel and the coach. There was some talk about there being tension between Kessel and some of his teammates. Hard to say how much of that is true and whatnot, but based on the comments from Jim Rutherford, there's definitely something going on, and it may or may not have a lot to do with Kessel. Could be some other players involved here as well. But TSN strongly believes that Phil Kessel will be the main player for the Penguins to try to trade this summer to really shake things up. Obviously, they had 2 straight years here of lack of playoff success, and it's gotten a little bit worse each year. Some people thought they might completely blow things up and trade a star like Malkin, which we had discussed here on the channel before. There was a pretty hot and heavy rumor about him going to the Florida Panthers, which at this point, most people are starting to dismiss. I mean, it does kind of make sense that the Floaters are going to try to attract some big names and boost ticket sales and try to revamp that team and have more success. Not sure Malkin would be the guy to bring in, but certainly a possibility. Kind of made sense in a way what that rumor was talking about, but trading some younger forwards like a Jonathan Huberdeau, which was the rumor. Not really sure that that's the best way to go, but I do understand the attraction to bring in some name power and kind of rejuvenate that club for sure. But trading Phil Kessel to a team like the Coyotes, for example, would make a lot of sense. They've got a lot of young forwards, and they don't have a lot of star power within their team. Obviously, Phil Kessel can still put up a lot of points. They don't have a ton of veteran leadership within that forward group. They do have some veterans there, of course, but nothing that's going to put up a ton of points. So Kessel would be a big help, as we saw the Coyotes come pretty close to making the playoffs this year. They're certainly a team that's on the rise with a lot of that young talent. And a guy like Kessel could bring that veteran presence and ability to score and maybe take them up a notch. So certainly something to keep in mind. We know him and Rick Tocchet have a great relationship, but TSN strongly believes he's likely going to be traded and going somewhere this offseason. So let me know your thoughts down below on Phil Kessel. Is the Penguins going to trade him? And where is the most likely landing spot if they do? Now jumping over to another trade rumor, let's talk about the Vegas Golden Knights and right shot defenseman Colin Miller. Now we mentioned him briefly here before. We want to bring him up again today because there's been a lot more speculation that he will be moved. There's a lot of talk that he is available and that if other teams want to pitch the Golden Knights on a potential trade, they're more than willing to listen and likely will trade the right shot defenseman sometime over the summer. Now he's still relatively young. He's only in his mid-20s. He's got a contract for another, I believe it's 3 years at $3.5 million. So it's a reasonable contract a lot of teams can afford. He can certainly bring some offense. Unfortunately for Miller, he kind of fell out of favor though with the Golden Knights coaching staff, and his playing time has been reduced. He was even a healthy scratch during the playoffs. So obviously it does appear as though they're ready to move on here and give another younger defenseman another opportunity to kind of take his role. I know we've talked a lot about the Leafs and that necessity to add a right shot defenseman who could play in the top 4. Colin Miller very well might be that guy who can take on that role because he has a contract that would be more likely to work with their cap situation. It's well documented. We've discussed many times how the Leafs have a lot of hard decisions to make this summer around their salary cap. Who's going to be signed, who's going to go, How much is the Marner contract going to come in at and kind of set the rest of their roster and cap situation? There's a lot of question marks in Toronto, but obviously addressing the defense is one that Kyle Dubas definitely needs to look at. Now, the reason I feel that the Leafs and Colin Miller have a strong connection here is the Sault Ste. Marie connection. Kyle Dubas obviously came from the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds organization in the Ontario Hockey League, and Colin Miller is from Sault Ste. Marie, and he played his junior hockey there. They're very familiar with each other, and I do believe that the Leafs likely would have interest in bringing him in for the right price. They could likely attain Colin Miller here without giving up too much. It's been rumored that some of their other forwards, like a Connor Brown, for example, might be on the market, and it was speculated that the Leafs were having trade talks with the Oilers at the deadline about Brown and getting a right shot defenseman in return. So very well could be the similar type of deal. I mean, there is still a link of Brown to the Oilers, and that very well might happen. I'm not suggesting that there's any serious talks about Brown to the Golden Knights, but it's that type of player that very well would interest Vegas, because obviously they're in a cap situation here as well. So they kind of need to take on less salary than what's going out. They trade Miller. They could take back a lower salary to kind of ease their cap situation, or maybe they go down the route of just a prospect instead. Certainly a possibility. Doesn't mean they have to have a roster player in return, but it's certainly a team to keep your eye on. I wouldn't be shocked to see Toronto and Vegas potentially hook up for a trade involving Colin Miller this summer. Now, jumping over to the free agent rumors, there's some pretty interesting names on the free agent market this year. There's going to be some big marquee names that are likely going to be wearing different sweaters next fall. And I want to get started here with the Dallas Stars. There is some talk recently that forward Jason Spezza might make his return to the nation's capital in Canada, back to Ottawa. It was revealed in an interview that Jim Nils advised Jason Spezza that he won't be re-signed in Dallas. They met after they were eliminated from the playoffs, and he is already aware that his time with the Dallas Stars is coming to an end. No big shock there. He's been making $7.5 million for the past number of years. His contract's up. He's a UFA. He was one of Jim Nils' first major acquisitions to kind of revamp that Dallas Stars team. Unfortunately, they didn't find the success that they were hoping for, but at one point, Spezza was playing a much bigger role. And of course, as time has gone on here, his age is catching up with him. His skills have diminished a bit, and he's playing a smaller role, but we did see a resurgence from Spezza in the playoffs. He's indicated that he wants to continue playing. He's not ready to hang them up yet. He understands he's going to have to take a shorter-term deal with significantly less money than he was previously earning, but that's fine because he still has the desire to play. Many believe that Spezza will want to get into hockey management once his career is over here sometime in the next few years as well. So we'll see what happens, but he was asked bluntly in an interview if he would return to Ottawa, and basically ever since that interview, this has kind of blown up a little bit to suggest that he's going to return, which I think is a little bit premature to say the least. All he said was that he wouldn't rule it out, that it's a place that he's quite familiar with, and he's going to factor in his family. Obviously, he's got a wife and 4 children to think of, and they want to go to a place there, have some familiarity and comfort, and that works well for their family. So all he said is he wouldn't rule it out, and at this point, anything was possible. And then most media outlets kind of ran with that. So could he return to Ottawa? It's a possibility. My concern with that is obviously the Senators are going through a major rebuild, and I would hate to see him take away a roster spot from a promising young forward who might need the time to develop. But at the same time, the team's been gutted with many of their veterans being transferred out to other teams. So they do need some veterans on that team to kind of guide the way here. And due to that, they could use a guy like Spezza to come in and kind of show these younger forwards the way. And he still has the skills that he could still be productive, help on the power play, and he'd get more playing time there than he would with most other teams. So overall, I'd be okay with it for that perspective. And at the same time, Ottawa could use a good news story. I'm sure that the ownership and the GM, Pierre Dorion, would probably put a spin on it, saying, hey, look, some people want to come back and play here. They could certainly use some wins with the stories around the team, because there's been so much negativity over the past year or two. So obviously him returning might actually put a positive spin on the franchise, even though a small one for the time being. Staying with the Dallas Stars momentarily, they did sign defenseman Esa Lindell to a 6-year extension of $5.8 million as well. So now it's being discussed that the younger defenseman Julius Honka likely could be done with the Dallas Stars. He's 23 years old now. His development has kind of stalled, and it's quite possible that he could be looking for a fresh start this summer. He is an RFA, so it's more likely the Stars probably wouldn't want to leave him unqualified and let him go UFA and leave for nothing. But I would imagine it's quite possible before a contract is reached here that he very well could be swapped maybe to another team with another prospect in a similar position that could maybe use the benefit of a change of scenery and see if they can get their career back on track and develop into a regular NHL player. But there's another young player who likely could find himself on the move here this summer. Now, could we see the first ever sign and trade in NHL history here this summer? Certainly a possibility based on the latest reports here from TSN Insiders, which came from their updated report here on their TSN trade bait board, including Artemi Panarin. Now, obviously, Panarin's a UFA. Not expected to go back to Columbus. Him and Sergei Bobrovsky have been very vague over their futures really since the preseason and beginning of the regular season here. It does appear, though, that both of them more than likely do leave via free agency this summer. We already saw team president John Davidson exit to go take the job with the Rangers. So obviously that is step one here in the exit out of Columbus. Hopefully this team can rebound and get back on their feet. They will have lots of cap space if they're unable to sign these players to new contracts. But at the same time, it's been reported that Panarin might be really interested in that 8-year deal, which he can only get from Columbus. But at the same time, doesn't really want to play in Columbus for 8 years. So could another team be willing to play ball here with Columbus and Panarin, have Columbus do the 8-year contract and do a sign and trade? It's certainly a possibility, but I don't think teams would be wanting to give up a whole heck of a lot when they can negotiate with them on their own on or after July 1st and sign him without giving up any compensation. So if that does happen, I would think that the price tag going in return wouldn't be as huge as you might think. Certainly wouldn't be anything comparable to like a trade deadline deal or anything of that magnitude. But it is possible, being reported here, that Panarin might be very interested in an 8-year deal in a team like the Rangers or the Panthers or the ones that have been linked to him here for the last number of weeks and months might be willing to give up a prospect or a first-round pick or something that's not too significant in exchange to make Panarin happy and get him on board here for 8 years instead of 7. Getting him that 8th year would likely help them get their cap situation a little bit more in order, because having an extra year in there likely would bring the overall cap hit down a little bit. This is likely going to be a fairly significant contract for Panarin, and anything will help to kind of help them get that down so they can manage the roster a little bit more efficiently. So could we see the first ever sign and trade in the NHL this summer with Artemi Panarin? Certainly a possibility, but I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Would a team be willing to give up an asset in order to make Panarin happy and get that 8th year and lower that annual value on the cap hit just a little bit here to get him under contract for 8 years? Next up, let's talk about Erik Karlsson, who's having himself quite a playoff with the San Jose Sharks. You can tell he's not 100% watching him play. He's certainly having a lot of trouble with that groin, but just like we saw in that run with the Senators a couple of years back when he was having a lot of problems with that ankle foot injury, he's still a very dynamic player even when he's not 100%. A 70 or 80% Erik Karlsson is still better than the bulk of the defensemen around the NHL. He's still a very dynamic player having a major impact. It's speculated now, based on the insider Chris Johnson's most recent radio hit, that he likely won't be staying in San Jose once the season comes to an end. He said it's been a very tough adjustment for Carlson and his wife, being that her family's in Ottawa. They just seem to be, on a personal level, having a very difficult time adjusting to life on the West Coast, and that it might not work for them longer term, and that he likely wants to head back east. Now, he didn't suggest exactly where he was going to be signing, but there is 2 teams that apparently at the forefront of signing Carlson as a free agent here, and it's the New York Rangers and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, of course, one would be easier than the other, but the New York Rangers, of course, are going through a rebuild, but do have lots of cap space. They've got a new president, John Davidson. We'll have to see what his vision is for this team. I would suggest that they likely wouldn't be making any significant trades to give up a lot of younger assets to move this team out of the rebuild and move it forward. But if they can grab a top free agent, that might be something they're willing to consider. Obviously, Carlson has some friends that play for the Rangers, including some fellow Swedish hockey players like Henrik Lundqvist and Mika Zibanejad. So certainly there is an attraction that way. New York's being an East Coast city, not too far from home of his wife Melinda. So certainly there is an attraction there as well. I think living in New York might suit them better than perhaps on the West Coast in California. And also, it was indicated in this radio hit as well that he would be willing to take a discount to play in Tampa for 2 reasons. One, because of the state tax laws, he would actually take home more money because of the income tax difference. And secondly, he really wants to play with his good friend Victor Hedman. And to make that happen, he would be willing to accept a lower contract. Obviously, Tampa is still a long ways from Ottawa, from where his wife's family is from, but it's something that was being speculated quite a bit around the time that he was being rumored to be traded way back. Tampa was a team that was in the mix. Now, the problem with Tampa is they'd have to clear a fair bit of space to be able to do this. They're up against the cap themselves. They have a big-time RFA in Braden Point they need to sign this summer. And they would also have to move out here some other players. We're talking about guys like Ryan Callahan, Alex Killorn, probably a Tyler Johnson, to make enough room here to make it happen. Now, it might be difficult to trade Callahan. They'd likely have to retain some salary. But thankfully, he's down to 1 year. They could consider a buyout, but of course, they're not going to get as much of a relief that way. Tyler Johnson does have a form of a no-trade clause as well, so that complicates things. So it's not exactly an easy task, but Johnston believes that if Tampa was willing to sign him and that they were basically had an agreement on terms and he would be patient with Tampa to let them sort out the rest of their cap situation before he signed to make sure they could make it work, because that would be his preference on where to play. But the Rangers are not far off here and being another great option for him as well. Could we see Erik Karlsson back on the East Coast playing either for the Rangers or the Tampa Bay Lightning in the fall? Certainly a distinct possibility according to Chris Johnson. Let me know your thoughts down below, especially if you're a fan of one of these teams. What do you think about signing Erik Karlsson to a 7-year contract this fall and adding another dynamic player to your lineup? So that is all the latest NHL trade rumors and free agent signing rumors here for today. There was lots to cover. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe for more videos just like this one. Plenty more content coming as we approach free agency in the NHL draft. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.